Hi, this is your host, and today I want to talk about dinosaurs, specifically one of the biggest misconceptions that most people have about them. They didn't all die at once. In fact, the period in which they went extinct was about 3 or 4 million years long, depending on exactly what you're talking about. So let me tell you, there were quite a few dinosaurs still kicking around when it happened. So there were 3 major events that killed off lots of dinosaurs, but not all of them. The first was the Ontong Java eruption in what is now Indonesia, about 270 million years ago. This was a massive event, with about 3,000 cubic kilometers of ash and lava spewed into the air, an amount 30 times greater than the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens in Washington state. But like the Yellowstone supervolcano, the Ontong Java eruption wasn't a single event, but a series of eruptions over hundreds of thousands of years. It caused massive climate change, including massive volcanic winter, but also ocean acidification. You see, the magma that came up from deep in the earth contained gases that had been under intense pressure for millions of years. When they were suddenly brought up to the surface, the pressure was released, and those gases, mostly carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide, escaped into the atmosphere. The sulfur dioxide reacted with water vapor and oxygen to form sulfuric acid, which fell to the earth as acid rain. The oceans absorbed most of the carbon dioxide and became more acidic. This created huge problems for life. First, it made it difficult for shelled creatures like clams and corals to build their shells, because the acid reacts with calcium carbonate, the main component of shells and coral skeletons, dissolving it. So animals that lived in the ocean couldn't build their shells, and old shells were actually being dissolved. In the air, the high levels of carbon dioxide formed a thick layer that trapped heat from the sun and caused global temperatures to rise rapidly. But before the temperature could rise too much, the ash from the volcanoes blocked the sun and caused a volcanic winter. The sudden temperature swings and changes in precipitation patterns led to mass extinctions. There were some very notable exceptions. In the Lacustrine period, which began after the eruption, only about 15% of marine species and 30% of terrestrial species survived. But there was one group of animals that was basically unaffected by the crisis. Their fossils are found all over the world in places that were once tropical, temperate, and even polar, and they are the crocodiles. Crocodiles and their relatives, the birds, dinosaurs, turtles, snakes, and lizards, along with many kinds of mammals, managed to survive the extinction event. One reason they were so successful is that they were mostly medium-sized. If you look at the fossil record, you will notice that during the Permian period, most land vertebrates fall into 2 categories: small animals, less than 1 meter long, and gigantic animals, more than 6 meters long. But during the Triassic, medium-sized animals dominated. The crocodile relatives were medium-sized, and so were the ancestors of turtles and the first dinosaurs. In fact, all of the major groups of reptiles alive today first appeared during the Triassic. And the dominant dinosaurs at the time were medium-sized, like the famous Coelophysis. So why were medium-sized animals better survivors? Well, it has to do with how they use water. Medium-sized animals need to find water every day to drink. Small ones can get by without finding water every day. And big ones can go for long periods of time without needing water, because they lose water slowly. Medium-sized animals need to stay close to water sources, which means they experience the benefits of increased humidity and protection from predators, but they are also closer to their food source. Small animals have to search for food, which makes them vulnerable to predators. Big animals can wander far and wide to find food, because they don't need to drink every day. So medium-sized animals seem to be in this sweet spot of vulnerability: access to food and access to water. No other group adapted to this niche, as well as the crocodile relatives. Some of them would become the largest predators on the planet, while others specialized in hunting different prey. And one group would eventually evolve into birds. But another group of dinosaurs were becoming a problem: the sauropods. These were the really big plant eaters, like Diplodocus, Brachiosaurus, and Argentinosaurus. And they started becoming very successful after the eruption. You see, the sauropods had evolved from the same ancestral group as the crocodiles and dinosaurs, but they had split off early in the Triassic. They had a huge advantage over the crocodiles: their size. Sauropods were already getting pretty big by the end of the Triassic, but they got bigger during the Jurassic. Why did the sauropods only get big after the mass extinction? Well, The answer might lie in their digestive systems. Sauropods had special adaptations to digest plants more efficiently. It's like multiple stomachs, specialized mouth structures, and large livers. These features allowed them to consume massive amounts of low-quality food like ferns and cycads and digest them. But these adaptations required more energy to power them than the previous generation of herbivores needed. That meant they needed more food, and that required them to be bigger, and their gigantism provided even more advantages. Because of their size, sauropods had very few predators, and they didn't need to move very far to find food or water. In fact, sauropods probably spent almost all of their time in the same area. They were perfectly adapted to the post-volcanic world. There was one problem, though. The sauropods were just way too big. Being huge required an incredible amount of food, so much food that the Earth simply couldn't produce enough of it for all the sauropods. It was literally impossible for there to be sauropods everywhere. And the Earth has never been able to support sauropod populations since. That's why we never see them in the fossil record until the late Jurassic, and why they only lived in South America and Africa, two of the wettest regions on the planet. But things were about to get worse for the sauropods and the other dinosaurs. After 30 million years, the continents had drifted apart and the Atlantic Ocean was forming between the land masses. At first, this was good news for the sauropods because it forced them to move further south in search of new habitats. But then something happened that was devastating for the dinosaurs. A massive ice sheet formed in the south, blocking the path to even warmer areas. So the sauropods and the other dinosaurs were stuck. And this time there was nowhere left to go. With no suitable habitat, many sauropods died off, but a few groups managed to adapt to the cold and become the modern sauropods of the Cretaceous period. For example, the diplodocids, the group that includes Diplodocus and Apatosaurus, had evolved in the harsh environment of the south, and they had developed a thick coat of feathers to keep them warm. Some of these animals, like the famous Maiasaura, were among the last dinosaurs to ever live. And this brings us to the asteroid impact. With the ice sheet in the south and the asteroid impact in the Yucatán, the dinosaurs were trapped with no escape. The asteroid impact triggered massive volcanic activity in the Deccan Traps in India. It's causing even more massive amounts of greenhouse gases and ash to be spewed into the sky. It blocked the sun and caused a nuclear winter. Temperatures plummeted and global rainforests disappeared. Most of the dinosaurs were gone within a few million years. But some sauropods were still hanging on, like Argentinosaurus, the largest animal that ever lived, until it, too, died out. So remember, the dinosaurs didn't all die at once. In fact, it took several major events spread out over tens of millions of years, and each event affected the dinosaurs differently. And yet they all died out anyway. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. Thanks for watching. See ya.